Unit 1, the process of communication. Structure, objectives, introduction. What is communication? The process of communication, barriers to communication, different types of communication, written versus oral communication, different types of face-to-face interaction, characteristics and conventions of conversation, difference between conversation and other speech events. Let us sum up suggested readings and serve. Sender encoding to message to channel to receiver to decoding. Feedback. This is noise. Objectives. The aim of this unit is to tell you the process and elements of communication, different types of communication, barriers to communication, difference between written and spoken communication. After you complete the unit, you should shift your attention from English as a subject of knowledge to English as a skill that you can train yourself to use. Introduction. What is communication? We all engage in communication with other rights from our birth. When we interact with others, we are communicating with them. Right now, I am communicating with you through this unit, and while you are reading it, you too are in fact communicating with me through this text. It is often said that we live in an age of communication characterized by speed, efficiency, and ability to transcend physical or geographical limitation. But what does it mean to communicate? The dictionary definition is to exchange men's thought or make known information or feelings by speech, writing, or other means to transmit. Communication is more than just messaging or shopping information. It involves not just word but the use of all our senses. With face-to-face dialogue, our facial expression, tone, body language, ability to listen with patience all contribute to the conveying message and information between people. For example, the written word, whether in book and magazine, emails, or text, can convey more than just the writing. It can inspire, elevate, and encourage if that in the intention of the writer. It can also confuse and exasperate if we are not careful. Lenny Truss, in a recent book on punctuation, pointed out how easily the meaning of the written word can be altered just by rearranging the punctuation. She invites us to compare the following two sentences. A woman without her man is nothing, and a woman without her man is nothing. As human beings, we have the ability to express ourselves and share our thoughts and feelings in many ways. We could live in isolation, never communicating with another person, but that would not create value. We can keep feelings to ourselves or we can share them. Each person has his or her unique view of things, and each perspective is valuable. Through sharing these individual ideas or views with each other, global solution may be found. Someone may share an idea that the other persons may not have even considered. These differing views could be compared to a jigsaw puzzle, where each person has their own piece, and when the pieces fit together, The full picture emerges and a solution is found that may not have been considered previously. Certainly, increased communication that uses technology can be enormously valuable. Being able to share information quickly between people has meant that a disaster in one part of the world can be responded to in another. It has led to the fall of corrupt governments as people have been able to unite in challenging authoritarian regimes. People in remote areas fighting injustice have linked up with people on the other side of the world who can support their cause. As with everything, new technologies such as email and text messaging have the potential to be positive or negative. So, don't you see the value of communication? Next, the process of communication. The following figure gives a simple model of process of communication. Sender, encoder, writer, speaker. Receiver, decoder, reader, listener. Message to text, encoding, decoding, written, spoken. Check your progress one and comment this. Elements of communication. If we look at the figure given above, we can derive the elements of communication as follows. 1. Communication involves at least two persons. A. The addresser and B. The addressee. 2. The topic, the content of the message. 3. The channel, the medium through which the message travels. Example letter, telephone, email, etc. 4. The code, the language of message. Example English, French, Hindi, etc. 5. The message form, the selection of particular grammar and lexical choices of the message. 6. The setting, the social and physical setting. Check your progress too and comment this. The role of the decoder. The process of decoding by the address is not passive, as some people think his or her role is an active one. Language, it is said, does not have meaning. It has potential for meaning, and it is the decoder who is actively engaged in making meaning on the basis of his or her background knowledge and the context of communication, that is, the knowledge of subject, topic, addresser, addressee relationship, knowledge of the code language used, the physical and social context, etc. Let us consider the following utterance. Mr. Gupta is not coming. The literal meaning of the sentence is not difficult. It is quite clear, but do you know what the speaker wants to convey? Is it a statement for our information? Is it a warning for the hearer? We can understand this text only if we know what the context is. That is, who is the addresser? Whom is she or he addressing? When, where, and in what context? Suppose the addresser is the managing director (MD) of a company and the addressee is his secretary. The MD utters these words on arriving in his office and going through a fax message. Mr. Gupta is an consultant with the foreign collaborators of the company and he was due to arrive that day for a meeting with the MD and other officials of the company. If we possess this background knowledge, we will be able to understand the meaning of the sentences uttered by the MD. The sentences can now be called an utterance in the context. The secretary can enter the utterance to mean the meeting will have to be cancelled and the official information accordingly. Arrangements such as sending the car to the airport, hotel reservation, etc. If any madam, Mr. Gupta will have to be cancelled, etc. etc. When we make an utterance, we always do something. We use language to perform some function, example to inform, warn, promise, persuade, etc. And the hearer or the reader can derive the meaning of the utterance only through actively processing the utterance in the context in which it is made. Check your progress 3. Comment this. Macro functions of communication. The macro functions of communications are listed below. 1. The emotive function to communicate the inner state and emotion. Example, oh no. 2. The directive function seeking to affect the behavior of others. Example, close the door please. 3. The fatigue function opening the channel or checking that it is working. Example, hello, is it Thomas Cook? Or can you hear me, Mrs. Gupta? 4. The poetic function. The particular form chosen is the essence of the masses. This refers to the aesthetic functions of language. 5. The referential function to carry information. 6. The metalinguistic function focusing attention on the code itself. Example, the use of both will or shall is correct in modern language uses. 7. The contextual function creating a particular kind of context. Example, right, let's start the meeting now. Check your progress 4. Comment this. Next, barriers to communication. It is said that communication can never be 100% complete. Many factors are involved in the process of communication and something can always go wrong with one or more of these. From your own experience, make a list of some of the factors that can impede communication. Let us now consider some of these barriers. A quote. That is, the addresser and the addressee may not share the same language between them. The addresser is speaking in French and the addressee does not know French. B. Vocabulary. The market decline under persistent bear hammering. One who is not familiar with the vocabulary of the stock market may not understand what is meant. Concept. The technical and subject specific concept may not be understood by all. For example, a black hole is a simple language, yet the concept may not be understood by many. Background, knowledge, and sheer assumption. Example, of Victorian style mansion may not be understood by those living outside England. Pronunciation, annotation, accent, and stress in spoken language sometimes may not be understood. Culture specific communication may cause misunderstanding. Physical environment, noise and other environment disturbance or even physical disturbance between the address and addressee can impair the effective communication. Affective factors, personal factors, example, anxiety, fear, attitude, motivation, beliefs, values, lack of mutual trust, lack of time or pressure of work, lack of attention, and personal rivalries. All these factors impact communication. Check your progress 5 and comment this. Different types of communication. Types of communication: verbal and non-verbal. Verbal are three types: written, oral, and visual. Communication may be classified into several categories on the following basis: expression, written, oral, and gestural. Flow: internal, vertical and horizontal and external. relationship, formal and informal. Various media of expression, written, oral, and gestural. Communication can be achieved through various media such as writing, speech, gesture, and action. One can use written word or draw pictures, or one can use speech sounds. Speech is primary, writing secondary. That is, speech come first, and the writing system was developed later on. There may still be some languages which are spoken but not written. In fact, several of the tribal languages do not have any script. Deaf and dumb people use action and gesture in order to communicate with each other. This is also a form of communication and known as sign language. The visual challenge, read and write using Braille. At the workplace, communicating in writing or via email is the most popular form of communication. It can take various forms such as letters, circulars, office memorandums, newsletters, brochures, bulletins, report, manual, house journal, magazine, etc. You are already familiar to some of this. This does not mean that oral communication is not used in workplace transactions. Speech is also used, and quite often. It takes the form of face-to-face interaction, telephone conversation, lectures and talks, meetings and discussion, etc. Expression through body language is known as gestural communication. Who is not familiar with the nodding of the head from side to side and should say no or up and down to convey yes. Parents often use this means of communication with their children if they tend to be naughty in the presence of guests, and it is often used in workplace situations as well in similar circumstances or when verbal communication is impossible. Example, in the factory where the noise of machinery makes verbal communication difficult. Check your progress. 6. Comment this. Pictures, charts, diagrams are also used either on their own or in combination with written or oral communication for greater effect and better understanding. Business houses make use of them in their illustrated catalogs and brochures meant to promote their product. Downward, upward, and horizontal communication. Companies have to communicate with outside agencies and other communication, government and private bodies, newspaper, advertisers, manufacturers, machinery, builders, suppliers of goods and services, client and customer, etc. But there is also the need to communicate within the company itself. Example, communication between the superior and the subordinate. That is from higher to lower levels of authority. This is an example of downward communication. There are also occasions when communicate flows from a subordinate or subordinates to a higher authority. It may be a report, suggestion, opinion, or a charter of demands from the worker. We call this upward communication. Both these are form of vertical communication. Communication between the officers working at the same level of management is called the horizontal and lateral communication. Example, interaction between manager production and manager marketing. It involves exchange of ideas, information, opinions, or seeking clarification, etc. between personnel of the same rank. Formal and informal communication. At the workplace, these two terms are used in a slightly different sense that what is generally understood by them. Communication done through the chain of command is known as formal communication. It involves the transmission of the official message in the formal organization structure. Such communication is planned and established by management and clearly indicates the hierarchical relationship involved, and these generally are in writing, example order, decision, instruction, etc. Informal communication does not flow through the official channel of the communication. It involves the spontaneous expression of reaction and ideas and is usually done orally. Hence, it may carry incomplete or incorrect information. The words formal and informal are used to indicate change in form and language of communication according to change the relationship between the addressor and the addressee and the context of situation. For example, you will use informal language while talking to your brother at home, but if your brother also happens to be your boss in office and a formal meeting is going on in office, you will address him in a different way. That is informal style. Next, written versus oral communication. When we speak of language As a tool of communication, we mean both spoken and written forms of the language. Both these modes can be used for communication. While they perform the same function, their form and manner of use differ in many respects. For example, one makes use of sounds, others of symbols. The speakers are available to him or her. The full range of voice quality effect as well as facial expression, postural and gestural system, but this paralinguistic feature and denied to the writer. The writer, on the other hand, has typographical variety at his or her disposal. The speaker is face to face with a hearer, while the writer writes for an absent reader who may also be far away in space and time. The different features have their own advantages and disadvantages. In oral communication, the speaker, being face to face with the hearer, can monitor and match the reaction of the hearer. At the same time, she or he can simultaneously plan his or her next utterance and fit it in the overall pattern of what she or he wants to say. She or he must keep on talking during the period allotted to him or her. She or he must decide when to take his or her turn, how to interrupt his or her interlocutor, how to hand over the turn. In fact, she or he must be in command of all the conversational skills. She or he has certain advantages as well. She or he can observe his or her interlocutor and, if necessary, modify what she or he is saying. Oral communication is quicker, more economical, and more effective than written communication. Doubt and misunderstanding can be cleared on the spot as immediate reaction and response is available. There are variation in spoken language and also in the way it is delivered. This could be on account of geographical and or social and cultural differences. There are dialectal differences, accent differences, and also differences in the use of paralinguistic feature and body language. Speech is less organized than written language. It contains many incomplete sentences. Often it contains simply sequence of phrases. These features may easily create misunderstandings. Oral communication is less reliable because it is not available in future. It is also affected by the attitudes and personality, self-interest, beliefs, values, and prejudice of the sender as well as the receivers, and also the time and circumstances of the communication. Oral communication is also not suitable for lengthy messages to be communications. Oral communication is also not suitable for lengthy messages to be communicated to distant and widely scattered people. Similarly, the written mode gives the writer certain advantages as well as disadvantages over the speaker. Since the writer is writing for an absent reader, she or he may look over, reflect, and edit what she or he has already written. With no fear of being interrupted by his or her interlocutor, she or he can take his or her own time in choosing a particular words, even looking it up in the dictionary if necessary, reorder what she or he has written, and even change his or her mind about what she or he has to say. She or he is under no pressure to keep on writing. She can even destroy what she or he has written, throw it into the dustbin without fear of offending the reader. But the writer has disadvantages too. She or he has no access to immediate feedback and simply has to imagine the reader's reaction. This no reciprocal natures of written communication make it more difficult to learn. Written communication ensures the transmission of information in a uniform manner, and there is little risk of unauthorized alteration in the masses. Since it is put in black and white, it provides a permanent record for future reference. Written communication tends to be complete, precise, and unambiguous. The message can be repeated at regular intervals, and lengthy messages can be sent to widely scattered readers. But written communication is time consuming, expensive, and rigid, and it becomes difficult to maintain secrecy. At the workplace, face-to-face, the telephone communication are generally confirmed in writing by post or email, particularly when the communication is with the world outside Why do you think is it necessary to do so? Discuss with friends or mates at the study center the comparative advantages and disadvantages of the telephone mode of communication over face-to-face interaction. Check your progress. 7. Comment this. Next, different types of face-to-face interaction. Brown and Welly, 1983, used two terms to describe the major function of language. The function of language, where the transfer of information is involved, is called transactional, and the function involved in expressing social relations and personal attitudes is called interactional. 1a. A said, there's no message for you. Transactional. People said, okay. Next, B. A said, how are you? Interactional. B said, fine, thank you. In the world of business, one has to make one of language for performing both of these functions. In business transaction, different situations may arise when one has to use language for different types of face-to-face interaction. Conversation for establishing social contact, performing various functions such as introducing oneself and others, making inquiries, giving and seeking information, giving instruction, reporting conversation, giving the company's profile, describing person, place and processes, developing relationship, getting people to do things, offering help, seeking help, apologizing, persuading, elaborating, arguing a point, explaining a situation, comparing two products, negotiating business deal, asking for and giving advice, etc. 2. Participating in discussion. 3. Taking part and conducting meetings and interviews. 4. Lecturing. 5. Demonstrating company's product. 6. Talking about where you work, describing simple and everyday operation, describing works and business operation, describing office working condition, consulting and reporting to superior, asking for and giving advice, talking about problems at work, etc. Most of these encounters will be transactional, while some of these will be interactional. Conversation. You are already aware of social interaction at the workplace, that is meeting and greeting people in business and developing a conversation from your observation. Can you recall or drive some rules of face-to-face conversation? Do you think there are rules for conversation in every language of the world? Native speakers learn naturally as part of their growing up in the society and following these rules in their conversation with other native speakers. Discuss this with others in your study center. Human beings spend a large part of their lives engaging in conversation, and for most of us, conversation is among our most significant and engrossing activities. We have already described the importance of communication, particularly face-to-face communication. Researchers from several academic disciplines have looked at conversation as an object of inquiry and come up with fascinating findings. Our understanding of how people conduct conversation has been enriched by observation made by psychologists and linguists, among others. Before we describe the rules of conversation, let us be clear about the term conversation. As Richards and Smith point out, the term conversation is used somewhat ambiguously in current literature. It is used sometimes to refer to any spoken encounter or interaction, and sometimes more restrictedly to talk occurring when a small number of participants come together and settle into what they perceive to be a few moments cut off from or carried on to the side of instrumental attacks. A period of idling felt to be an end in itself, during which everyone is accorded the right to talk as well as to listen, and without reference to a fixed schedule, everyone is accorded the status of someone whose overall evaluation of the subject matter at hand is to be encouraged and treated with respect, and no final agreement or synthesis is demanded. Differences of opinion to be treated as unprejudicial to the continuing relationships of the parties. Goffman, 1976. All talk, it is pointed out, is rooted in its surrounding. But conversation in this more restricted sense is not very firmly rooted to the world as other kinds of utterance. The activities which are directly governed by norm for the use of speech as termed speech events. As speech events, conversation can be contrasted with other types of speech events such as lectures, discussions, interviews, debates, and meetings. Characteristics and conventions of conversation. The cooperate and politeness principle. Conversation is more than merely the exchange of information when people take part in conversation. They bring to the conversational process shared assumption and expectation about what conversation is, how conversation develops, and sort of contribution they are each expected to make. When people engage in conversation, they shared common principle of conversation. They lead them to interpret each other's utterance as contributing to the conversation. One of the assumptions we make when we take part in a conversation is that if I ask you a question, whatever you say will somehow be interpreted as constituting an answer to my question. Consider the following example. 2. A site. Which generator did you buy? Besides, it is a Honda. Let us now consider the following. 3. A site. Which generator did you buy? Besides, you could have killed it. In this latter case, the speaker B does not seem to have followed the principle described above and hence the resulting exchange is uninterpretable. The philosopher Grice has described four maxims or principles of cooperative behavior which speaker observe in conversation. These are 1. Maxim of quantity. Make your contribution just as informative as required. To maxim of quality, make your contribution one that is true. 3. Maxim of relation, make your contribution relevant. 4. Maxim of manner, avoid obscurity and ambiguity by brief and orderly. Conversation is more than a serious exchanges. It consists of exchanges which are initiated and interpreted according to intuitively understood and socially acquired rules and norms of conversational cooperation. This can in turn be manipulated to create a wide range of meaning beyond the level expressed directly by the utterance in the conversation itself. Consider the following example 4. A said, it is very hot in here. Besides, I will open the window. We can infer the meanings of B's response. The room is hot probably because the windows are closed. So if the windows is open, cool fresh air will come in and cool the room. B's response is thus quite relevant and interpretable. Check your progress 8. Comment this. We also know that the rules of conversational implicature dependent on manipulating the four maxims can be used to express sarcasms, irony, criticisms, and a range of other types of inferential meaning. Consider the following exchanges. A8. How is the food? Besides, there is plenty to fill your belly. B is manipulating the maxims of conversational implication to suggest that the other qualities of the foods are not worth mentioning. However, at the workplace, the emphasis is on clarity of communication, and indirect speech acts as manipulation of maximum generally avoided. The relevance of Grice's maximum to conversation in a second or foreign languages is dependent on the degree to which such maxims are universal or language specific. In Indian culture, for example, even during an interview for a job, candidates are very modest while talking about themselves and their achievements, while in the European context, the tendency is to display oneself to an extent which an Indian might term boasting or bragging. Adjacency pairs. One way in which meanings are communicated and interpreted in conversation is through the use of what have been called adjacency pairs. Adjacency pairs are utterances produced by two successive speakers such that the second utterance is identified and related to the first as an expected followed up. The two form a pair if the first utterance constituting a first pair part and the next utterance constituting a second pair part. Adjacency pair is described as a basic structural unit in conversation. Consider the following example of adjacency pairs. A greeting, greeting. A said hi, beside hi. B compliment acceptance. That's nice dress. B thanks. The basic rule of adjacency pair operation is that when a speaker produces a recognizable first pair part, she or he should stop talking and the conversational partner should produce a recognizable second pair part. Adjacency pair thus provide for turn taking and also prescribe the type of taking that the next talker can do. Check your progress 9. Comment this. Check your progress 10. Comment this. Opening and closing. Conversation, it is pointed out, do not simply begin and end. The opening and closing of conversation and other types of speech events are organized and orderly. All transitions from a state of non-talk to talk or from talk to non-talk require engineered solution. Opening and closing are problematic for the native speaker as well and have to be learned like other social behaviors. For non-native speaker, it is an area which needs special attention. Opening and closing are speech event specific. For a formal meeting, for example, there is an initial summons, a memo, circular along with the agenda, etc. We will talk about the topic in some detail when we discuss below different types of face-to-face interaction. A conversation is quite different from many other speech events in that it has no specified setting, no time or place, no required rules other than persons involved, thought, some external rules such as boss or secretary may not be set. No specified agenda and a quorum of simply two or more. Like other speech activities, however, conversation must be opened and commonly this is done through the use of an adjacency pair such as greeting, greetings, request, grant, question, answer, or statement response as in the following speech event. A. Good morning. B. Side. Morning. Can I help you? A. Side. I want to see Mr. Bhatnagar. B. Side. Which Mr. Bhatnagar do you want? We have two Bhatnagars in this office. A. Side. Mr. Mukul Bhatnagar. He is Director Finance. B. Side. Do you have an appointment? A. Said. I am afraid not. B. Said. Let me check if he is free. You are Mr. Said Malhotra, Deepak Malhotra from ABC. Mr. Malhotra takes his seats after a few minutes in the waiting room. Besides, I am sorry he is in a meeting. He said, when is the meeting likely to be over? Besides, no idea. Can I take a message? He said, will you tell him I came to see him? Besides, I will certainly. He said, thank you. Besides, you are welcome. Topic development. Another important dimensions of conventional organization is the way topics are selected for discussion within and the strategies used by the speakers to introduce, develop or change topic within the conversation. Coherent conversation. Respect norm concerning choice of topics. For example, in a business meeting, members will take turn to speak only on the items on the agenda notified in advance and from among these only on that items which is being discussed at the moment. Topics may develop in a recognizable structure as, for example, the language of buying and selling, court trial, doctor and patient conversation, etc. Check your progress 11. Comment this. Turn taking. Conversation, by definition, involves two or more people, but the distribution of talking among the participation is not merely random. It is governed by turn-taking norms, conventions, which determines who talks, when, and for how long. One who talks too much and does not allow time for other, or one who contributes nothing to the conversation arouses negative evaluations. Rules for turn-taking differ according to the type of speech event. In the classroom, for example, students generally raise a hand to take a turn to talk. Repairs. The process of conversation involves monitoring to ensure that the intended messages have been communicated and understood. This involves corrections with whenever it is suspected that the message has not been received as intended. The term repair refers to the effort by the speaker or the hearer to correct trouble spots in conversation. Repairs may be initiated by either the speakers or the hearer. You said, Mr. Malhotra is not in his office? We said, sorry. You said, Mr. Malhotra is not in his office at the moment? Next, difference between conversation and other speech event. Hymns use the term speech event for activities that are directly governed by norms for the use of speech. A speech event conversation can be contrasted with other types of speech events such as lectures, discussions, meetings, interviews, debates, etc. We recognize each of the speech events are distinct by virtue of differences in the number of participants who take part in them, as well as through differences in the types and amount of talking expected of the participants, the setting, quorum, if any required, etc. Speech events like conversation, as shown above, also have identifiable rules for proper beginnings, middles, and endings. Violations, if noticed, are frowned upon. Opening and closing, as already said above, are speech event specific. For many speech events, there is an initial summons, example, a memo or notice, calling for a meeting and participants assemble over time before the occasion actually begins. There may be a specified setting, example hall, classroom, and the persons who assemble are oriented to a specified categories member, example members of the club, union, students, faculty at a college lecture. Some events such as a formal meeting, example the annual general body meeting of the company, require a specified number of participants before the events may properly be seen as beginning, such as a quorum at a meeting. Some speech events may not begin as soon as the required persons are present. This may require formal makers before the event properly begins. When the audience assemble for a lecture, there may be background noise and conversation may be in progress at different corners in the room. But the lecture itself has not properly begun until an authorized person uses some sort of attention getter saying right or okay, it is time to begin, etc. We will be talking about interviews and meetings in subsequent units when we will illustrate in details how these two specific speech events differs from conversation. Here we propose to consider another feature in which lecture differs from conversation. While talking about the differences between spoken and written modes, we said that one of the differences between these two modes of communication is that writing is an activity that is non-reciprocal in nature. Can you recall what we meant by this term non-reciprocal? Lecture, whether written or spoken from notes, tends to be non-reciprocal in this sense. In other words, there are no adjacency pairs, no turn taking, no immediate verbal feedback as we have in conversation. Though in the classroom lecture, the teacher might get feedback from expression on students' faces, raising of hand, uneasy movement, etc. So she or he has a necessity of propel the communication on her or his own. This process of negotiation, it is interactive, but this interaction is conducted by the speaker himself or herself by enacting the roles of speaker as well as of audience. Since there is no immediate reaction, she or he has to anticipate what is likely to happen and provide for any possible misunderstanding arising from the lack of shared knowledge. In the words of Widdowson, the act of lecturing is the enactment of the exchange, with the speaker taking on the roles of both the interlocutors, but whereas in spoken discourse conversations, this process of negotiation is typically overt and reciprocal. In lectures and written communication, it is covert and non-reciprocal because of the absence of immediate verbal reaction from his or her audience. The speaker has a basic problem. She or he has a certain message to impart, and she or he has to prepare the ground and set up conditions favorable to the reception of such information. She or he does this by continually shifting his or her function from speaker to hearer, enacting the interaction by playing the role of each interlocutor, as in the following example. Yesterday I spoke to you about Canada. Today I shall talk about Australia, which happens to be the next topic. Australia is a land of contrast. It is geologically one of the oldest of land masses, yet it ranks as one of the youngest nations. It is half a world away from Europe, but its people are largely of European descent and they follow a Western lifestyle. If we look at the above text, we find that the speaker makes an assertion in the first sentence and the subsequent sentence are then said to support what she or he says in the first sentence, as if to answer the question of the listener. How can you say that? Can you give proof? We can write this text as follows. Speaker said, Australia is a land of contrast. Listener said, how can you say that? Can you give some proof? Speaker said it is geologically one of the oldest of land masses, yet it ranks as one of the youngest nations. Listener said, can you give more examples? Speaker said, yes, it is a half a world away from Europe, but its people are largely of European descent and they follow a Western lifestyle. A lecture-like written discourse thus involves non-reciprocal interaction, and the result of this is a text. The audience must interpret this text to reconstitute the interaction, as it does not reveal the second person's or the audience's reactions, which the speaker and the writer anticipates by enacting the other participant's role. It is in this sense that lecturing is covered and non-reciprocal and differs from conversion, which is overt and reciprocal. Let us sum up. In this unit, we have tried to understand what communication is and defined it as the process of meaningful interaction between two or more persons with a view to arriving at a common meaning and understanding. Communication can be achieved through use of language, written or spoken, and gesture. There are different types of communication and these are used on different occasions. Each of these modes of communication has its own advantages and disadvantages. Communication may involve repeated interaction and negotiation of meaning, and the addresser and the addressee play active roles in this process. Effective communication in business is an important as the blood circulating in the human body and hence messenger do their best to overcome all barriers to communication. Further, we also describe different types of face-to-face interaction, especially conversation, its main feature and how to develop it to make it meaningful. We have also described briefly some other types of face-to-face interaction and how they differ from such each other and from conversation. Suggested readings. Answer.